Hello everyone, welcome back again. Firstly, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who's reached out to us over the last few days in response to our last video about FTR3 and the mystery bar work under the dashboard. The video created a lot of interest and we've been able to get a lot of contact details, extra photos, drawings and all sorts of information on FTR3, which has been able to explain what that bar work is and why it was installed in the first place. I'll run through it all with you now and I'll give you an overview of all the information. We did speak with a lot of people, so I'm not in a position to say this person said this person said that, otherwise it'd get way too confusing. But we did get to speak with a lot of people, including Glenn Setons himself. So we'll run through now an overview of all the information and where we're at as of today. So not long after we put the video out last week, we got this photo sent to us of FTR3, and notably a bit more of a detailed look under the dashboard. Now you may recall in last week's video, we had a look at the pedal box and all the bar work, and it did show on the transmission tunnel that there appeared to be some extra bars. Now this photo that we've got during the week shows a really detailed look at it, and there's actually a lot more work that's gone into it than what we thought. Now originally on FTR3, you could see there where the radio's strapped to in this photo, that bar work was right against the firewall and really there was nothing else. So that whole section of crossbars that's now in the car, which you can see here, has brought the bar work well forward, and it's also gone through the transmission tunnel and goes underneath the car. So it's quite an intricate setup. It's actually a whole new subframe section. Now you can see the hole in the transmission tunnel where the cabling goes through for the bars. You can see the hole still there for the main power source back to the starter motor, which goes through the floor of the car. And you can also see the holes are in the firewall for where the plumbing goes through into the engine bay. So you can, as a reference point, you can use those points to see that that whole structure is a lot bigger and better than what it was back in 2000. So that raised the question, this wasn't a 2-second job, this was a lot of work that had gone into FTR3 to, I guess, stiffen the front of the car up. So that's when we started speaking with more people as the week went on. So at this point during the week, we were lucky enough to be able to talk with some people who had a direct involvement with FTR3 during its racing life. One of those people was Glenn Setons, and we're really appreciative that he took the time to speak to us, and it's awesome to know that he still has a lot of passion for his cars 25 years on. The general feeling around FTR3 was that it wasn't modified in any way during its racing life with FTR. The chassis was built late in 2000. It was stiffer than its predecessors. As an example, which we covered in our last video, it had the diagonal bar work between the rear trailing arm boxes and the rear shock towers. As well as a Larry bar, there was no real need to modify the chassis. Glenn did ask us to send him as much information as we could, photos of the chassis, the original drawings from cams, so he could review it and speak to some people that may have some more information. The idea was floated that it may have been ProDrive who made the updates and changes to FTR3, given that David Bernard did race this car as an AU for the first portion of the 03 season. This was quickly discounted as an option, given that at the time ProDrive were trying to build 3 brand new BA Falcons, one for Craig Lowndes, one for Glenn Setons, and one for David Bernard, and all available manpower and infrastructure was focusing purely on getting 3 BA Falcons on the track as soon as possible. We were lucky enough to speak with the people that were involved in the build process of FTR3 when it was converted to a ride car. Now again, this is only going off memory because this build happened in late 2003 or 2004, but they're absolutely adamant that any modifications that were done to the cage were limited from that center roll hoop section toward the rear of the car. There was no modification to the front half of the car that they can recall aside from removing the Larry bar. So again, it doesn't paint a very clear picture on what happened under the dashboard of FTR3 and when it happened to get the chassis layout we've got today. Obviously, there was conversion work done to convert it into a BA to the front and rear, but aside from that Larry bar being removed, none of this section that we're looking at here today was touched. While we were waiting on some information to come back to us, we also learned a little bit more history on FTR3. This car was almost rushed into service as it replaced the badly damaged FTR1 that suffered a bad testing accident at Phillip Island, where Glenn Setons was injured and actually had to sit out a couple of rounds. There was talk that FTR3 would have the build rushed to be finished so he could make the Sandown round, but Glenn was too unwell at the time to race the car. Therefore, Neil Crompton raced FTR2, and he ran that for the Sandown event as a sole entry in car 6. FTR3 was originally booked to test at Phillip Island on the 19th of October for a shakedown before Bathurst. However, that timeline wasn't met, and it was then rebooked to be tested on the 24th of October at Winton Raceway. Interestingly, at that test, Marcus Ambrose was scheduled to drive the car before he jetted off to America to show his wares and potentially audition for a drive in one of the FTR Falcons in 2001. Poor weather that day ensured that that test didn't happen, and the test was scheduled for the following week at Phillip Island. Haven't been able to confirm which date this was, but obviously it was prior to Bathurst, and as the logbook photos show, FTR3 was shaken down at Phillip Island, with the photos for the logbook taken in pit lane at the iconic circuit down in Victoria. So after all these emails, phone calls and exchange of information, we were still none the wiser on how these bars ended up under the dashboard of FTR3. We've got the builders that built the ride car saying that we didn't touch the front half of the cage, I should say. We've got ProDrive discounted as an option because of their high workload in 2003. And we've got photos from the early days of FTR showing that those bars simply weren't there. So really, we were none the wiser. This may be seen as bordering on lunacy to be putting so much effort into such a minimal detail, but we really want to try and have FTR3 back to how it raced in the early 2000s. FTR3 is the most capped chassis of the 4 FTR Falcons, given that it carried liveries and raced in 2000, 2001, 2002, and it also raced in the new form of ProDrive in 2003. So it is a very iconic car, and it's important to the history of FTR and Ford Motorsport. So we'd like to make sure that we can get as much information as accurate as possible, so when the car does go back together, it's a really good example of an FTR early 2000s Falcon. So earlier in the video, I said that we'd spoken with Glenn Setons, and he asked us to send him as much information as we could on the chassis as it is today, and all the historical information we've been able to dig up throughout this journey. Now, Glenn was able to speak with some people and put the wheels in motion to try and understand exactly what has gone on with the front half of FTR3. And I'm glad to say that he was able to get to the bottom of it, and we could get the answers that we needed with his input. Turns out, FTR3, when it was racing, we believe some stage in 2001, Glenn's team ended up getting on loan for a period of time an engineer from Tickford. And they spent a lot of time on the chassis of FTR3 trying to create some extra stiffness across the front to increase the turn on the AU Falcon. So that's how this bar work ended up in there. It was done, I guess the engineer came into the team on loan purely to try and make the AU Falcon a more competitive product. So this bar work was original to the car, or was in the car when FTR3 was racing as an FTR Falcon. You can see on the back of the bar work, as we covered in the earlier video, it does have white paint on it. So it does line up perfectly with the timeline and I guess the hard evidence that we've got in front of us. So we've got to make the decision, but we believe now, given that it was in the car when it raced as an FTR Falcon, most likely from 2001 onwards, we believe it should stay, but we will confirm this once we get the rest of the cage and everything all done. But we're really happy to say that that section of the car was in there when it was racing around as a number 5 FTR Falcon. So that answers that question. We're hoping during the week we'll have some more information on the back half of the cage and what the plans are for that moving forward. We've also got a donor AU Falcon here, which you can see, which is in really good condition. It's a rust-free section for the back of the car. So all this will get cut out and we'll end up transferring a lot of this over, obviously getting it prepped up and blasted and cleaned up to go in the FTR Falcon. So we're really excited about that. So while we're waiting on the final information to come in on the cage as far as what engineers are going to do what to the car, we'll then work on getting the donor car prepped and ready, and we'll get FTR3 back as an AU Falcon. So we'll keep you updated as we go. Keep an eye on the Facebook page. There's heaps of photos and that we're putting up fairly regularly on the progress. And yeah, thanks again for everyone's help. Obviously, if there's any additional information that comes to light, we'll share it with you. But that's how we believe all that information came to hand and how that bar work ended up in the car, which was in the car when the car was running around as an FTR factory Ford. Thanks again for your support. We look forward to sharing more with you as it comes to hand.